I'm going to take you all on a brief journey through my artistic endeavors over the years. So here I am at age 4 with a stunning picture of my family. I'm actually very impressed with how accurate this looks because, that's kind of exactly what the Murrays look like in real life. So fast forward 5 years, and I'm 9 years old, and really starting to get influenced by the things I see around me. And that's all reflected in my work, even if those things were just cartoons. So this is my favorite character from a show that I used to watch called Digimon, and if I'm being completely honest, it's not too bad for a 9-year-old. Okay, this one's pretty embarrassing. When I was 12, I started getting influenced by music a lot too, and you can probably guess what kind of music that is, because this picture makes me cringe so badly, like my eyes want to bleed when I see this. I'm also starting to get influenced by anime because this is also when I started watching anime. So you'll see those themes in my art. So I don't know what this is. This is like my interpretation of like a goth girl or something, but it's so bad and it's really embarrassing. We might as well be calling this presentation Claire Murray's Embarrassing Preteen Years. So this picture is also a little embarrassing. I drew this one in high school, freshman year, but my art style is changing. There is a difference between this one and the last one, and so that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. Okay, this picture is a huge step up from the last one. It's not traced, but I did use a reference picture when I drew it. It's actually from a manga that I read, and you'll start seeing themes from that manga incorporated into my art. And after being influenced by a professional, I think my abilities in art increased a lot. And this is a rare but fairly decent attempt at realism. Again, I was looking at a reference picture, but I think this one is so different, just because realism is so different. And it's much more difficult, so I'm proud of how this one turned out. And finally, I drew this one a few weeks ago, and it's kind of showcasing what my current art style is. The girl with the darker hair is actually the same girl as this girl, but drawn 3.5 years later, so you can really see the change there. And you'll see elements of anime and elements of realism, because although the eyes might be a little bit big and the hair might be a little bit spiky, it's, for the most part, anatomically correct. So I'm happy about that, and if this is, my current art style, then I'm proud of that, and just grateful that I don't draw like I used to. Okay, so now that I've embarrassed myself enough in front of you, I'd like to segue into what is officially the most recent thing I've created. It's the final product of my senior project, a graphic novel called Transorbital. It tells the story of a scientist who lives in a dystopian society that uses transorbital lobotomies to keep the world running smoothly. I didn't include any pictures of the graphic novel in this presentation just because if any of you decide to read it, I didn't want to spoil it for you. So back at the beginning of the semester, a 31-page, fully paneled and inked graphic novel with flawless art, an excellent storyline, and smart dialogue seemed like a great idea. But with my inevitable procrastination, I knew that I needed to make some big changes along the way. The first step in this process was the paneling, where I used a computer program to create panels of each scene in the comic. It had a little bit of a learning curve to it, but after a few pages, I got the hang of it and finished it in no time. The second step was the dialogue. I took a quick break before I started the actual art, and this took about a week. And other than a small case of writer's block, it was a pretty easy step. Then came the actual art. The first step in this was creating outlines, like rough sketches of each scene. And this took about a month. I kept setting deadlines for myself, but I never followed through with them. I also did it digitally on my drawing tablet, which was kind of difficult for me, and it was just altogether just a slow, tedious process. And so by the end of it, I knew that if I were to ever finish the more important final draft, I needed to make a big change. So about 2 weeks before Christmas break, I decided to switch mediums of art and restart the entire comic on paper with a pencil. So, contrary to popular belief, my point in making this comic was not to demonstrate my monstrous procrastination. I wanted to create this comic to integrate art with the brain. Integrating science and art and music has always been personally interesting to me because it takes something so elegant and it breaks it down into scientific principles and anatomical structures. I think the brain is one of the most fascinating topics of study, and being able to look at this in depth while exploring some of my favorite hobbies was just a great experience for me. So before I get into some of my research, I just want to clarify that when I say artist, I don't just mean this kind. I mean this kind, or this kind, or even these kinds. Because art does not just pertain to visual art. It pertains to performance art as well, which includes music, dance, and even acting could be considered art. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the term nature versus nurture, or the question, does a person's biology or environment shape who they are? Or more specifically, which of these makes an artist? So to answer that question, let's start with nature. Creativity can actually be traced back to specific structures in the brain. The brain has 4 major lobes, each with its own functions, structures, communication systems, and networks that make the brain work correctly. Some of the major systems that are used in creativity are the attentional control network, the imagination network, and the salience network. The brain also has, the artist's brain also has specific structures that set it apart from a non-artist's brain. For example, an artist has a more developed cerebellum, which is associated with fine motor control and muscle movements. They also have more gray and white matter in specific areas of the brain, especially one called the precuneus, which is involved with spatial processing and consciousness. For those of you who don't know, gray matter is essentially neural matter made up of dendrites and axons, glial cells, synapses, and capillaries, while white matter regulates the ability of the brain to learn. A study was done on jazz musicians and freestyle rappers showing that when they were letting their creativity run wild, their brains were exhibiting these symptoms, and their language areas, visual areas, and motor coordination areas were lit up, as well as a highly active prefrontal cortex. So now that we know that the brain is highly involved in the creation of creativity, what about someone's environment? Nurture comes in the form of the cultivation of one's own skill. So basically, practice makes perfect. I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't spent so much time with my sketchbook or so much time practicing my trumpet. And it's really what sets something like this apart from something like this. And although we've learned that there are specific structures that make an artist's brain different, I believe that anyone can learn to be creative. The brain is plastic, meaning that it can form new connections and change throughout life by reconfiguring connections between neurons. So in that way, to answer my question that I posed before, the ability to create art and music originates in the structure of the brain, but if those innate abilities are nourished and supported, a child can develop their skills and learn to be more creative throughout their life. My own experience with art and music shows how important these subjects can be to a person. When I'm creating music or art, I have to go beyond the raw creative impulse. So when I'm playing music in a band, you need to know more than just the notes to play. You need to know how to phrase your music, how to blend with your other musicians, and how to respond to directions from the conductor. When you're making art, you need to understand perspective and proportions, as well as the proper techniques and even how your pencil works on the paper. I've also learned to analyze my artistic abilities as well. I can play a scale on my trumpet and find the corresponding frequencies of each note. I can learn how the laws of motion act inside of a trumpet, as well as understand why a note may be sharp or flat. When I'm drawing my comic, I can look down at the page and see lines, shapes, color, and form, instead of just pretty pictures. And I can understand how my brain processes them. I just think it's fascinating how this little 3-pound lump of nervous tissue is responsible for my ability to be creative, and that it's responsible for both my inherent abilities and my growth throughout the years. And that's extremely important to me, because my life would not be the same without art and music. So if I can leave you all with one message today, it's that creativity is what makes the world unique. And as I state in my comic, without creativity, there's not much left. Thank you. Are there any questions?